Forms in React may look simple at first, but handling validations, live updates, those focus behavior can make it really messy. Hey, this is Tapas. Welcome back to 15 days of React design pattern. Today we are at the day 02. I hope you have liked day 01 and the introduction video of this series. Today we will explore control versus uncontrolled components and the design patterns around it. We will see where beginners to React.js often go wrong and learn how to write predictable code, maintainable forms. I hope at the end of this session, you will feel much more confident in terms of handling forms in React. So what are the things we are going to learn today? Our focus today is on learning difference between what is state and what is refs in React. In the last video, we spoke about use state, we spoke about managing state. Today, we need to learn about refs, use ref, what is the fundamental difference between state, ref, when to use what, etc. That's when we'll be able to appreciate a lot of behavior that we'll be seeing in handling forms, thus in the control versus uncontrolled component. And then we'll also learn that why not to mix both state and refs. Also, we will talk about there are situations where we really cannot avoid mixing them, right? But we need to keep a balance between them. We have to strike a balance between them. We're going to talk about them. Then we'll learn what is a control component, what is an uncontrolled component. We will learn about the patterns around them. And as we learn about the patterns, we'll also learn about the anti-patterns and the best practices. And finally, we'll end it with the task. I hope you have done the task of the previous session, previous episode, and submitted on Discord already. If you have not done, please do that, because that is going to motivate you and me to take this course till the end. And you are also going to earn the badge that I have promised in the last session. The main prerequisite of today's session is understanding the difference between state and refs. So let us understand with some code examples, some small project, because once we understand the difference, the fundamental difference, and when to use what and why both of them exist in React today, we'll be able to understand the control and control component much more easily. When building React applications, you often need to store data and manage UI behavior, right? We understood what a component is, right? A component is something which has the UI and also the logic inside it for the UI to become operational and interactive. Basically, the behavior of the UI. That's what the component is. Now, if I have to manage that UI's behavior, like some data is getting loaded, something I'm clicking, getting hidden, getting shown, all this kind of behavior, if I have to do it, I need to manage the data somewhere inside the component as a private data to that component. That's what is called state, right? So React provides basically two primary tools for storing data and managing the UI behavior. One we all know is state, I explained just now. The other one is called refs. Both state and refs helps you in managing data, but they work very, very differently. So what is state first? In most of the cases, we deal with dynamic UI. As in, here is a simple UI where you can search inside this text box, and based on the search term that you provide, your search list gets updated. So this is the dynamic behavior of your user interface. What is happening basically when I put a search term over here? Based on the search term, I'm making some calculation. That's my business logic at the end. And after that, I am planning to render whatever I'm supposed to render in this search list. So every time I put a new search term, this portion of the component, this particular component must be re-rendered based on what is my input over here. So it means that I have to manage dynamic data some way that impact my rendering. Getting the point? I have to manage the dynamic data some way that impact my rendering. At the same time, the data should be treated as the source of truth for my UI. It means what a source of truth means. Anytime I have to look what is the current status of my data, maybe a user list, maybe a product list, maybe items in the cart, I should be able to get that from the state of my component. So only thing that I should be relying on for data for a component is the state. That's why the state is called the source of truth. So the points that you need to remember over here, state is React's way of managing dynamic data that drives the rendering of your component. Okay. State is the source of truth of your UI. When state changes, the component re-renders. Obviously, because as state takes care of the dynamic nature of your component, it has to re-render to show you the current data based on the state change. That's the reason Whenever the state changes, React re-renders that component to show the current data, updated data. State is always reactive. What does it mean? It means that the UI always reflects the current state value, and we manage the state by a hook called useState in React. I've already shared a video on useState in the last session, last episode. I've also linked the same video in the description of this video. Please take a look into it if you're new to that. Let's take a quick example of React state and how do we manage it. I have created a folder called day02 for today's episode, and inside day02, let us create a React project. I have taught you how to create a React project from an existing scaffolding in the last episode, following the same command and given the project name or the folder name as controlled uncontrolled component pattern. I'll press enter. So this is going to create a bunch of file under day02. You can see that project has got created, control uncontrolled component pattern. So let me go inside control uncontrolled component pattern. Here I can install the dependencies. That's done. And then I'll be running this on localhost 5173. Great. Now next thing I'm going to do under src folder, let's create a new folder called state-ref, where we are going to keep all the components for our state and ref examples. Let's create another folder called components. This is really not required, but it's always to have that practice of keeping components inside the components folder. That's the whole reason I'm creating it. And here, let's create our most favorite React component ever, is called counter.jsx. I think any React beginner would have used counter.jsx in their life, and that's what I'm going to create as well. So a simple counter component will look like this. What we have done over here, let me explain. First, I have imported that hook that we use or React gives us for managing state is called useState. Then, of course, this is the definition of my component, name is counter, and we have created or instantiated a state, a brand new state called count using the useState hook and initialized it with the value 0. So that means initially the value of this state is 0. State is nothing but a variable that is you have declared inside a function. If you're coming from JavaScript background, treat this component as a plain old JavaScript function. Treat this one as a simple variable you have created using const, and then you have initialized it with 0. Okay, that's it. And then of course in JavaScript, once you declared a variable using const, you cannot reassign another value, right, to that because it's a constant. That's the reason you cannot do count plus plus letter point in time. You cannot do count equals to 2, count equals to 3, count equals to 4 because you have assigned it with const. So as you cannot assign a new value to this count variable, or you should not reassign a new value to this count variable, useState provides you a special function called updater function, using which you should be able to control the value of this particular state or variable. Okay, so that's what we get from useState. One is called count, another is called set count. You can name them whatever ways that you want. Coming back to the JSX, there is a simple heading called count, which shows the value of this particular count. I told that state in React is reactive. It means that it always reflects the current value, right? That means when this component gets initialized, the current value of the count was 0. If later point in time, we are able to increment the value of this count or decrement the value of this count using the set count method, that current value of that count will always be present inside the component. And that's what we are actually showing over here. And then there is a button. On the click of the button, we are calling a method called increment. Inside this increment function, we are calling this set count to increment the count by 1 every time this increment function gets called. A very simple counter component. So every time you click on this increment, React updates the count, and as React updates the count means count state variable gets changed. Once state variable gets changed, React triggers the re-rendering of the component. That means this portion of your component, this JSX portion of the component should be re-rendered, and as it gets re-rendered, this count variable will always show the latest value, the updated value. Okay, this is what it happens for state. Now I will go to the app.jsx, and in app.jsx we have a lot of stuff. I'm going to remove them. At the top of this component, I'm going to import counter, and then I'm going to use the counter over here. Simple, right? So that I can test it out. Now if I go to UI that's running on localhost 5173, I'm seeing this count initialized with 0, and if I click on the increment, it is getting incremented by 1 every time. Okay, now let's understand what is refs. While state is React components private data, source of truth, helps in re-rendering whenever the state changes, ref, the short form of references, is way different. That is helpful when you have to access and manipulate any DOM elements. Okay, that's the first use case. React by default declarative. In the first session, day 0, we learned the difference between declarative versus imperative. We know why React is declarative, because you tell React what needs to be done. You don't tell React how it needs to be done in the DOM level. But still, there are certain situations where you might have to access the DOM elements directly. And that's the time you will be using something called ref, using a functional hook called useRef. We'll see it in practice in a while. There is another use case for ref. This is the use case that many of us as a beginner may not realize, but is very, very powerful use case and sometimes can save a lot of performance headache. Ref is something that can persist values without triggering re-renders. Okay, let me write it down. So refs let you access and manipulate DOM elements. It also allows you to access persistent values without triggering any re-renders. Okay, and we use the hook called useRef to do this, to get the reference to a particular element. When you create a ref in React, it provides us a property called .current. Okay, its name is .current, that holds the value of a particular DOM node. And if we change the value of .current, it is never ever going to trigger the re-render of a component. If we change the value of a state using the updater function, it will always trigger the re-render of a component. But if we change the value of .current property that we get through the ref, it is not going to re-render. In fact, the value that we'll be assigning to .current, that value will be persisted, means saved across multiple re-renders. That is beautiful thing. So two things: the value of a ref's current property will be persisted across different re-renders. Second thing is, updating the value of .current property of a ref is not going to cause any kind of re-render. Let's understand both the things. First, a usage of ref. Coming to the components folder, let's create another component called autofocus input.jsx, and let me now explain what is autofocus input component. So the purpose of this autofocus input component is, there is an input text box. We want to get the focus element, basically the cursor, inside the text box as and when this particular component gets loaded, right? So that's my objective. Now, to get the focus on any of the input component, you need to access that input component at the DOM level. And once you access the DOM level, and once you can access that particular input component at the DOM level, you can invoke any other DOM methods, any other DOM properties that browser gives us, right? Through JavaScript implementation, browser gives us, we can invoke them. For example, if you want to focus on an input text box, we will invoke the function called .focus, right? If we want something call a value, we'll be invoking like .value, that kind of thing, right? Now we can only do that, we can only invoke all these DOM methods when we can access the DOM. So when it comes to a use case like setting a focus on a text box, we are not talking about the values at all. Whenever we are talking about the values, we are talking about the state of a component. But there are accessories like putting the focus or many other things where you have to get to the DOM level sometime. You will be using something called a ref or the reference. That's the whole purpose. We have imported this useRef hook. Once you have the useRef hook inside your component, you can get a reference. This is how I have initialized the reference. This is again declaring a variable using const, and this is going to give me a reference, and I'm initializing the reference with null, because at this stage, at the line number 4, I don't know to what element this input ref will be referred to. The way that I tell in React that input ref should refer to a particular element, using this particular property called ref. So take any of the element. If you have ref equals to a value that is nothing but coming from a useRef, this is the place this input ref will be assigned to the DOM node of this input type text box. Understanding? I'm just throwing some jargons, but if you listen to me carefully, you will understand what I'm saying. Initially, input ref is null, but the moment you do ref equals to this particular input ref, which is coming from useRef, this will start pointing to the DOM node of this particular input text box. Now this DOM node value, I will get it by invoking a property called .current on top of this input ref. So wherever I do input ref.current, I will get back the DOM node for this input text box. Okay. That's the reason I have done here input ref.current. This is nothing but the DOM node of this input text box. As I got the DOM node of this input text box, I can now invoke any DOM function, any DOM method, any DOM properties on top of it, right? One of the function that we know dot focus to get the focus on an element. That's what I have done in the dot focus over here. So here I am directly accessing the DOM and setting the focus. I have kept it using the use effect with an empty dependency because the use effect will run after this component mounts, and whenever the component gets mounted, the thing that's going to happen, it is going to find out, okay, which reference this input ref is referring to. It's referring to this particular input box, and this is giving me the DOM of that input box. Let's put a focus on top of this. That's what's going to happen, and that is we are going to see if we go to app.jsx file. Now import autofocus input, and then just below counter only, let's put this autofocus input. If I go to UI now, come back here, you see this text box is already having a focus. There's a blue border and a cursor is already blinking. I can directly type. So this is a use case of a reference where you should be using, where you don't need to tackle value. Whenever you need to tackle value is a state, but you need to tackle certain behavior going to the DOM level of an element. That's the useRef use case. Now let's take one more example where we have state and ref together so that we understand that persisted behavior I told. Like for state, whenever the state changes, components re-render. Whenever the value of a ref changes, means ref.current's value changes, component is not going to re-render. Rather, the value will be persisted across the renders. We can see that. Let's create one more component. Now we are going to extend the same counter component but with ref. So let's create a new file called counter with ref.jsx, and this is our component. Okay, I've also given certain comments beside the code so that later point in time when you're looking into it, it makes a lot of sense to you. This is the counter component first of all. So it means that it has a use state, of course, and with use state, we have something called a render count, which used to be count before. We just renamed it as render count, and set count is renamed as set render count. In your JSX part, here instead of count, I am showing the render count, and instead of increment, directly I'm calling the set render count and incrementing the render count by 1. So this portion of the code, you have already seen in the counter example over here. We have explained that to you. Exactly same thing. But along with that, we have now introduced one more thing is called counter ref. So one side of it, we are handling the counter using useState just like before. Another side in parallel, we want to also handle the counter value using the ref, the updation of the counter value using the ref, so that the difference between those two is very much visible. So for that purpose, useRef has been imported, and we have const counter count ref equals to useRef initialized with 0. We know all these things. And here in this section, if I have to show what is the value, current value of the count ref, the reference, I always have to invoke the property called dot current on top of it. So that's the reason I have count ref dot current, that is going to tell me the current value of this particular ref. Okay. Now, if I look into this count ref over here, this count ref is not been assigned to. Remember, this count ref is not been assigned to any of the element using the ref attribute, which we have seen in the previous example when we dealt with the focus of an input element, because there was a need. We had to identify which is that input element that we want to put the focus on. So we did ref equals to the ref. In this case, there is no ref use. That means pointing to a particular element at the DOM level is not my use case that I'm solving here. My use case that I am still solving the data part of this component using ref, despite I have the use state to handle the data part of the component, which we told in the beginning. Whenever you have to handle the data part of a component, the source of the truth, always use state, but we're trying to break that rule. And we are trying to handle the data part using the ref. So count ref dot current is supposed to show me the current value. Then there is a button again. I have the increment function. In the increment function, I am updating the current value with 1 and I'm logging this value. And count ref dot current itself, I am showing over here. Now in a typical scenario, whenever I am clicking on the button corresponding to the H2 that is showing the state, not the ref, every time this state value increased, this portion will be changed because render count will have a new render count and the entire component will re-render. So not only this section is going to re-render, entire component is going to re-render. However, ref value is changing. CountRef.current, if it is changing, incrementing, this is not going to re-render this component. Okay, so let's see that. To show that, I have to go to app.jsx and let me just import counter with ref, and after this autofocus thing, let me put counter with ref over here. Let's go to UI. Now I have this section. This is the section that I'm talking about. I'll click on increment ref count. I'm clicking on increment ref count. Ref count become 1. But here ref count is still 0. Why? Because your component has not been re-rendered. I click again. It become 2. Still not re-rendered. Press the button again. It's 3. Still not re-rendered. Okay. If component had re-rendered, we would have got the ref count value as 3 rendered over here, but we are getting 0. Now we'll come to the right side. This is also an interview question. What if I click on this? What will happen? What will be the value here and what will be the value over here? Can you guess? Let's see. What is your guess? So if I click here, you see the value. Value is 3 and here it is 1, right? So this is the right number. Why it happened? When I clicked on this part is where the things are managed through state. I incremented the state value. The moment the state value gets incremented, this is my entire component. The entire component get re-rendered. The moment the component re-rendered, what was the last value of this count? The last value of the count was 3. So 3 got printed over here. So it means that this particular value is persisted across different renders. So this got printed over here. We incremented the state value from 0 to 1. So of course, after re-render, the state's current value also will be shown. Now, if I keep pressing it, this will get incremented. If I increment ref count by another 2, I click here, it becomes 4. If I click here, it becomes 5. It got incremented, but as it didn't re-render the component, the value, updated value is not reflecting. But clicking on this, as this will re-render the component, this will become 4 to 5. And because of re-rendering and because of your ref is persisted across re-rendering, it will pick up the current value of your ref, which is 5, and this particular thing will be 5. Let's see, both are 5 and 5. If you understand this, I'm sure you're not going to forget state versus ref in your entire development career. And these are the crucial differences between state and ref. I want you to pause this video. I have shared a template with you already. If you haven't got it from the last episode, go to the description of this video, find out the template. It's free for you. Please take a note. Please create a table of differences between state and ref. Write it by yourself. Come back to Discord, share with me on Discord. Let me take a look. What is your understanding so far? We start seeing a messy feedback form. The feedback form which will have both state and ref together, and then we can break that into a controlled component, and by understanding what is a control component is, and then different version of uncontrolled component. Okay, so that's what we'll be doing. For that purpose, under src, let me create a new folder now called messy, and then let's create a new file called feedbackform.jsx, and the feedback form component looks like this. Let me again explain to you. If you have understood my explanation of the last example, this is almost similar. So here I have a component called feedback form with 3 things. One is name, second is email, third is message. So if I go to JSX, I will see a form. This is a form. Inside the form, I have an input box where I accept a name. Then there is another input box where I accept an email. And there is a text area where people can write certain message. Okay, these 3 things. And once these 3 things are written, there is a button, a submit button, pure HTML, through which user can submit this form. Okay, very simple. And when the form gets submitted, I am capturing that event using onSubmit and handling it with the function called handle submit. Inside handle submit, I first do e.prevent default, because by default form will refresh my page. I don't want that to happen. So e.prevent default. I check if name is not given. I use window.alert, say name is required. If email doesn't have an @ I say this is not a valid email. And then if there is no message value, I put the focus on the message text area. And if everything goes well, I just do a console.log of name, email, and the message value. How these things are declared, name, email, and the message value, is over here. Name is declared as a state using useState. Email is declared as a state using useState. However, message is declared as a reference using useRef. Okay, going back to the usage of message ref again inside this. This usage is good because I need to put a focus on it. Now, to put the focus on an element, I need the ref. There is no much other way of doing it because that's a DOM level operation. I have to get the reference to it and I have to put the focus. There's no harm in the line number 19. But there is a big problem in the line number 18. What is the problem in line number 18? The problem in line number 18 is we are also managing the value using ref. Whereas for name and email, we are managing it using state. So what will happen? First problem will happen that if I change the value of the name, my component will re-render. Great. If I change the value of email, my component will re-render. Great. But if I change the value of message, my component is not going to re-render because just now we have learned if we have created using ref and managing it with the dot current, then this is not going to kick the re-render of my component. Also, I am breaking the principle of the single source of truth for the value for a component, which I have kept intact for name and email, but broken it for this message ref. Now, this will give me a UI if I go to app.jsx file. For a moment, just taking this off because we have done the demo of these things already. And let me import the feedback form. And just let me use this feedback form over here. And let's go to UI. I got this feedback form. If I don't give name, it give me name is required. Great, give some name. If I don't give an email, valid email is required. Let's give a valid email. Now, if I do send feedback, okay, validemail.com. Now, if I click on send feedback, you see the focus is coming over here. This is great because focus I need to give here. Now, if I give some value over here and do send feedback, then only I am able to get the emails value, message value, and the names value. Great. But the point over here, the problem over here is like this particular message value is not handled in terms of state. It is handled in terms of ref. Now, this inconsistency will make the validation of the form, resetting of the form, or testing of this form much harder. If you manage it in the state way for the value, it will be lot better for you to validate the value of this form from the one centralized location, or if you want to reset it from one centralized location, or if you want to test this component later point in time, you can test it only based on the value. Right now you have to take care of testing for the value, for using the state, also for the ref. So you want to avoid that. Now this thought or this kind of behavior forces us to some patterns that we have to remember. The first thing that we're going to talk about is the controlled component pattern. In React, a control component is a form input elements like input, text area, select box, etc., whose value controlled by React state rather than the DOM. So here, name and email are the controlled component part because the value of name and email are controlled using the state, not by the DOM using the ref. Okay, so what does it mean? It means that the value that the input displays always come from the state. First thing first, when user types or make a selection of those input elements, the change happened, right? That change is going to update the state, okay, because it's all managed through the state. React will re-render the input with the new value, keeping the UI and the state always in the sync. That will be React's responsibility. So in terms of control component, it is much better to hand off this entire syncing of the value of the state versus what is shown on the UI to the React using the state capabilities. Now we have this code that we have seen just now on the feedback form, which is a bit messy because it is using the controlled and the uncontrolled way of doing things. Now, can we just refactor this code a little bit more to make it a control component? Let's do that. So for that purpose, under src, let me create a new folder called control. Under control, let's create a new file, a component called controlform.jsx. Let's create the control form. And what we're going to do, we have this feedback form, the messy one. We'll also open this up. So let's bring things one by one. Okay, let's bring this import over here. No worries. Now we have name, we have email that we had handled as two different states. Now you're also talking about creating a control component, means this message also will be another state. So now there are three different states to manage. The best practice is like if you have multiple state that is related to one thing, you better manage it as one state variable than multiple state variable. What does it mean? Name, email, and message are related to one thing, that is this feedback form, right? Name, email, and message is for the feedback form. So as it is for the feedback form, let's not manage them at three different states. Rather, let us just create one state called form, and the value of that is nothing but an object now. If you see, in that object, we have name, email, and message. So if I can read this form variable anywhere in my component, I can do form.name to get the current value of the name, form.email to get the current value of the email, form.message to get the current value of the message. If I have to update name, email, or message, any of this, I have to use this set form, pass the updated object that has the updated value of name, email, or message, so that the form state value gets updated. Quite clear, right? So now next thing I'll be copying is this JSX part. So let me just copy this JSX part and then come back over here, replace this JSX part. Now I cannot say value equals to name. I have to say value equals to form.name because I'll be taking the value from this form object. Similarly, I'll just copy this guy. I'll do form.email. I'll do instead of ref, I'll remove this. The value will be form.message. Cool. Of course, there is no set name, there is no set email, that kind of thing. Instead of that, on the on change, let me handle it using a function called handle change. We'll be creating it in a while. Okay, so just replace this. Here also, let me add one. Okay, and let's create handle change. Const handle change equals to, I take this event over here as I get it, and then inside this, what handle change is going to do, if the name is changed in the input text box by typing, change this name part. If email has changed, change the email part. If message has changed, change the message part. So it means that, as I told you, like if you handle it in the state way, you handle it in the declarative way where you can just update the state by doing a simple function call. So what I can do here, const, I can first extract name comma value from e dot target. What is the event that I am handling here is the onChange event. This will give me the event. From this event, I can get the e dot target, that is my input text box or the text area based on where I am invoking this, and I got this name and value. And then I can call this set form, this guy, my updater function, to update this particular value, right, to the updated value. For that purpose, I can use the destructuring of object. If you are new to it, please look into my 40 days of JavaScript, the object session. I'm sure that you will learn the same thing I have taught you there. So I can update each of this thing using this destructuring syntax. So if name change, name will be changed here. If email changed, email will have its current value. If message changed, message will have its current value. Great. Now the last thing is the handle submit. So let's go ahead and create a handle submit. Const handle submit equals to this event. Just like before, we'll do e.prevent default. Let me just copy it from here, y to right, and then let me put a console.log saying that, hey, form submitted, and this is the value of the form. Okay, useRef we have not used, so I'm going to remove this. So this is my control feedback form. Everything that I am managing is through state, and also I have combined the state. The state value, whenever it gets changed, my component will re-render. That's fine. And when submitting the form, as every update is happening to the state itself, that one source of truth, I get the updated value always inside this form variable, and I can do whatever I want to do with it, right? So let me go to app.jsx file once again. I'll remove this feedback form for now, and let me import the control feedback form and show the control feedback form over here. Now, if I go to my UI, I'm typing tapas, but nothing really happening. Why? There's some mistakes that definitely happen. If I type email, nothing happening. Message, nothing happening, right? So let's go back to the code. Let's go to the control feedback form. It is because each of these input elements value updation on change depend on the name attribute of that particular input element. And if you see in each of this input element, there is no name attribute. So let us add a name attribute whose value should match the key of this object. Okay, so here the name is the name. So here the name attribute value is name. Similarly, the next one will be adding as email, and for message let's add as message. Now let's go back to UI. So now if I type my name, I will type it. Let's do tapas at email.com and let's give some message and let's do send feedback. So if you see over here, I have the email, I have the message, I have the name, all the values I'm able to capture, and everything done in the controlled component way because everything is managed through the state. Now a twist. What if I need the same behavior like before? For example, if user have not entered name, let's say this situation, and somebody click on the send feedback, I want to put the focus on this name field, and I don't want this form to be submitted with this empty data. Okay, if somebody has given a name but not given an email, I want the focus to go to email directly. Has given name and email but not message, I want the focus to go into the message. Now I am talking about the DOM level changes, isn't it? So this is a pure use case where you might have to mix the state and the ref together, but they have their distinct functionality. State is managing the value, ref is managing the DOM level interaction only if it is required. This is the pattern that you have to use in terms of control component. Now if I have to do the same thing, let's bring back useRef again. Okay, and let us create 3 refs. Okay, initialize them using null, all 3 of them, and then going to the JSX part. For the text name, let's put the ref as name ref. For email, let's put the ref as email ref. And then finally for message, let's put the ref as message ref. So what does it mean? This message ref is now a reference to this text area, and email ref is the reference to this email text box. Name ref is to this name text box. So nameref dot current will give me the DOM element for this particular text box. The email ref dot current will give me the DOM element for this email text box. The message ref dot current is going to give me the DOM element for this text area. Now on those dot current, I can just do dot focus. You have seen me doing it for a previous example, right? Now you know what I can do when somebody submit this form. So let's go to the handle submit, and here I can check. This is where the data and your ref coming together. If form dot name, this is your source of truth, this is your data, this is your state. If it is not there, then I'll do name ref dot current dot focus, and then I will return from here. How beautiful it is. This is a place where you have to mix, because somewhere you want to manage the data, somewhere you have to manage the DOM level interaction. Now, like this, we can write the code for the remaining of it. So for email, I'm checking if form.email doesn't have at, then put the focus over here. If form.message is not there, then put the focus on the message. You're seeing that data is checked from state, but the ref's work, the focus work is done by ref. Now let's go back to the same UI and see it in practice. I refreshed it, and then without putting anything, click on send feedback. You see over here, you have this. Now let's put tapas. Again, send feedback. You see this email. Now let's do tapas at email.com. Now if I do send back, focus will come here. You're seeing this. Now I'll say hi, then only I should be able to submit and I get this value. Awesome. So state and ref in a control component pattern, it worked beautifully. Time for uncontrolled component. The uncontrolled component, which is the opposite of control component, where we used to manage things using React state, you have seen it. In terms of uncontrolled component, those input fields inside the form are not being managed by React state, right? Now there are 2 ways that you can do. If you're not managing by state, you can manage by ref. This is one of the example. So for name, email, and message, now there is no state, there is no use state at all. You have created them using the ref, and what you are doing basically on the handle submit, you are getting the value of name, email, message. You are doing all this focus work, and then on the submission, you are actually putting the things over here like name, email, message. And if you see in the JSX also, there is really no state value over here, and we are just referencing it with name ref, email ref, message ref like before, because you are to work on this focus thing, right? Changing the ref is not going to re-render your component. So if you don't have to re-render your form, and you have to persist these values like name, email, message in the course of re-rendering your application, then definitely this is the way that you can go. But there are much more simpler way of handling the form in the uncontrolled way. What is that? Let's see that. For that reason, coming to the uncontrolled folder, which I had created for this uncontrolled feedback form already, let's create another component called uncontrolled form no-ref in this case. And this is what this particular component is. There is no use state, there is no use ref. Handle it in a normal HTML JavaScript way. In an uncontrolled way, not through React state. Please use normal HTML form, HTML inputs. There is no state, there is no ref. When you are submitting, the form gives you something called form data, which will be always available inside the handler function of an onSubmit. So you can get the form data from your target, and from form data, you can get all the data that user have input inside the form input fields. This is a pure JavaScript and HTML way. There is nothing to do with React over here. This is the way you can proceed. This is the pattern that you can use when you are looking for an uncontrolled way of handling forms. So this uncontrolled way of handling is okay for the smaller forms when the forms are very simple. So as much as possible, go in the controlled component way. I hope the pattern that we have discussed for both controlled and uncontrolled were useful. Let's understand some of the use cases of both control components and the uncontrolled components so that you know where to apply this pattern. First, the control components. Wherever you are working with a complex forms, right, with validation, dependent fields, all these things, maybe a multi-step form with a global state, or if you try to use like more complex state management technologies like Redux, please go for a control components because there you need something which is data driven, and whenever the data comes, we are talking about the state. Uncontrolled components, I can only think about some, maybe the newsletter sign up or some simple login forms where you don't have to really do something with the data. I use uncontrolled components, or rather, I should say that I have used uncontrolled form components in my past only when I had to do some quick prototype inside my React application or some MVP that I am doing. But the moment I'm talking about a serious application, the moment I'm talking about an application that you have to push to production, I would always go for a control components and the control forms. Okay. So this is how you should be thinking about the use cases. Now let's talk about some of the pitfalls and the anti-pattern. And I want you to note down, okay? Now mixing state plus ref. If you do this unnecessarily, when it is a necessity, when you are interacting with data, managing data, doing it through state, but interacting with DOM, just like that focus example, doing it through ref is great. But if you're mixing it in a way that some portion of the state is being managed by state, use state, some portion of the values are managed by your ref, that is going to give you an inconsistent behavior in the components in the long run. So make sure that you're never ever mixing the state and ref unnecessarily, because the moment you do that, you're going to get inconsistent validation for form, inconsistent behavior for other components. Okay. Now using control inputs for tiny static form, that might be little bit too much. For example, there might be one newsletter component, just one text form field and one button, and clicking on the button you might want to execute some action at the server side. So you are really not managing any kind of values in your component in the UI side, so you don't need state. In that time, again, doing it in a controlled way is a over baggage. So that time you will be creating the simple HTML form. On submit of that, a function handle submit will be there. On handle submit, you might be calling a server action or a server function. That's it, very simple. So using a control inputs for a tiny static kind of form is an extra boilerplate, so you can avoid that. While doing that, using uncontrolled inputs for a large form is again going to be a nightmare. So don't do that also. If you have a large form, you have to deal with the value of it, you have to deal with the validation of it. Always control comp, no uncontrolled component. So the three rules that I want to give you for the pitfalls and anti-pattern: mixing state plus refs unnecessarily, inconsistent behavior, avoid. Using control inputs for tiny simple static form is an extra boilerplate, avoid. Using uncontrolled inputs for larger forms, harder to test and maintain, avoid. As we are coming towards the end of this video, I want to give you few things, okay? And I want you to take a good note of it. React 19 has come up with some wonderful improvements for forms. And I have started creating a lot of videos around that. So you can start looking into it. This is an ongoing playlist being updated, bit slow, but being updated. But as we are doing React design patterns now, I want to update this playlist with remaining forms as well. So far, I have done a form called use form status. It's a wonderful way that you can manage the forms in React 19. Another one is called use action state, which is my personal favorite, and I use that in production today. So these two videos where we talk about React 19 use form status hook and React 19 use action state hook, I want you to go through. Okay. After this video, I want you to go through that. So the link to those videos I have also provided. You will understand how remarkably React 19 has changed the form handling. There are a couple of more videos I have to add related to the form handling in React 19. I promise I'll be doing in the coming days. Talking about the task, today's task is pretty simple. Under day 02, you have a task.md file. So this is the task. Build a simple contact form. You can keep fields like first name, last name, email address, phone number, hobbies, interest, address, etc. And then a submit button to submit this form. Now first implement as a controlled component this particular form. Add some validations, using that data that you have, using the source of truth, using use state and all this thing. Then implement another version of it using the uncontrolled component. In that also two things, with and without ref. All three patterns I have taught you. All the code that you have with you. So you can always look for it, build it. Even if you know things, please do it, because doing task is going to boost your morale a lot, and you will always be motivated to learn further in the next episodes. What is your task? Please create a comparison table. Compare the pros and cons of the code style of both the approaches, the validation differences, how are you going to reset this form, that difference, the readability of both the components, what kind of complexity that you faced. Create a MD file, a markdown file on your GitHub. Capture this, capture all these pros and cons. So that's your task before you go to the day 3, where we'll be talking about another React design pattern. And where can you find this code? Where can you find this task? Please come to github.com/tapaScript. The link is there in the description of this video. Please feel free to follow this GitHub page. It might be very helpful for you because there are many other repositories available. Come to the repositories called 15 days of React design patterns, and over here you will find day 02 once this video is published. If you go inside day 02, just like day 01, you will find a task.md file, and you can start following and start working on it. If you like my work, please feel free to give a start to this repository as well. So my dear friends, my dear students, that's all I have for day 02. I am cooking day 03 and will be coming back again with day 03. Let me know if you're enjoying this React design pattern teaching. I would love to know. Please comment, please like this video, and please share. Please talk about it with your friends and social media, because that will be really good. A lot of effort that I'm putting. Want this to reach to as many as people possible. Thank you very much. Take a great care of yourself. Stay well.